The first thing Marcus Reed noticed was the silence. It was the kind of silence that made people stop talking when someone walked into a room, the kind that made strangers stare for half a second too long before looking away. Marcus had felt that silence his entire life, but today felt different. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of his career. He had spent 12 years working toward one goal, 12 years of training, 12 years of overnight shifts, 12 years of missing birthdays, holidays, and weekends. Now he was finally about to become the youngest black captain at one of the biggest airlines in America. As he entered the airport terminal in Chicago, he wasn't wearing his pilot uniform yet. His captain jacket was hanging over his arm. He planned to change before boarding the flight to Los Angeles. The terminal was crowded with travelers dragging suitcases and checking their phones. Marcus walked toward a coffee shop near gate A17 when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me." Marcus turned around. A middle-aged white woman wearing expensive jewelry looked directly at him. "Can you help me carry these bags?" she asked. Marcus smiled politely. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't work in baggage services." The woman looked surprised. "Oh." Then her eyes moved across his casual clothes. "Sorry, I just assumed." Marcus had heard those words thousands of times. "I just assumed." He nodded politely and continued walking. 20 minutes later, he changed into his captain uniform. The dark navy jacket fit perfectly. 4 gold stripes decorated his sleeves. His captain wings gleamed under the terminal lights. When Marcus stepped out of the employee area, people suddenly looked at him differently. Some smiled, some nodded respectfully. Others moved aside. The same people who ignored him moments earlier now saw authority, not because he had changed, because the uniform had. Marcus walked toward the gate where Flight 728 was preparing to board. That was when he saw her again. The woman from the coffee shop. She was standing near the front of the boarding line. The moment she recognized him, her eyes widened. For a second she looked embarrassed. Marcus simply smiled and continued toward the aircraft. The flight attendants greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Captain Reed." Passengers nearby immediately turned toward him. The woman's face became bright red. Marcus didn't say anything. He had learned long ago that dignity was more powerful than revenge. Boarding continued smoothly until another passenger arrived. His name was Richard Collins, a wealthy real estate developer whose face appeared regularly in business magazines. Richard was loud, confident, the kind of man who expected every room to revolve around him. As he entered the plane, he glanced at Marcus standing near the cockpit. Then he frowned. He walked directly toward a flight attendant. "Excuse me." "Yes, sir." Richard lowered his voice, but not enough. "Why is that man standing there?" The flight attendant looked confused. "Sir, the guy near the cockpit, that's Captain Reed." Richard laughed. "No, seriously." The flight attendant didn't laugh. "Sir, he's the captain of this flight." Richard stared at Marcus. Then he shook his head. "You're telling me he's flying this plane?" Several nearby passengers heard him. The cabin became quiet. The flight attendant maintained her professionalism. "Yes, sir." Richard crossed his arms. "I'd like to speak with someone in charge." Marcus stepped forward calmly. "That would be me, sir." A few passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Richard looked embarrassed for exactly 1 second. Then his expression hardened. "I don't feel comfortable." Marcus remained calm. "May I ask why?" Richard hesitated, because saying the real reason out loud would expose him. Instead he chose different words. "You look young." Marcus smiled slightly. "I'm 40 years old." Richard looked trapped. "I just think experience matters." "I agree," Marcus replied. "That's why I have over 11,000 flight hours." Several passengers quietly smiled. Richard suddenly realized the conversation wasn't going his way. Without another word, he walked to his first-class seat. The plane departed 30 minutes later. Everything seemed normal, until 2 hours into the flight. Dark clouds appeared ahead. Massive storm systems covered the route into California. Inside air traffic control centers across the country, controllers began rerouting aircraft. Turbulence warnings filled computer screens. Marcus reviewed weather reports carefully. The storm was stronger than expected. Far stronger. Lightning flashed across the horizon. The aircraft shook. Passengers looked nervous. Flight attendants secured the cabin. Then the turbulence intensified. A child began crying. Overhead bins rattled. People gripped their armrests. Marcus remained focused. Years of experience had prepared him for moments exactly like this. He adjusted the route, communicated with air traffic control, monitored every instrument. The aircraft climbed, turned, then climbed again. For nearly 40 minutes, the storm surrounded them. Rain slammed against the windshield. Lightning exploded around the aircraft. Yet Marcus never lost concentration. Not once. Finally, the plane emerged from the worst of the weather. The turbulence eased. Passengers began breathing normally again. A few even applauded. Marcus wasn't looking for applause. He was simply grateful everyone was safe. But the situation was about to become much more serious. A flight attendant entered the cockpit. Her face looked concerned. "Captain, what is it?" "We have a medical emergency." Marcus immediately stood. A passenger in first class had collapsed. When Marcus reached the cabin, he discovered the passenger was Richard Collins, the same man who had questioned whether Marcus belonged in the cockpit. Richard was unconscious. His wife was crying. Several passengers looked terrified. A retired nurse was already helping. "He needs medical attention immediately," she said. Marcus contacted emergency services on the ground. Doctors advised an immediate diversion. The nearest suitable airport was Phoenix. Marcus made the decision instantly. The aircraft changed course. Inside the cabin, anxiety spread. Nobody knew how serious the situation was. Richard's wife held his hand. Tears streamed down her face. For the first time all day, she looked completely powerless. Marcus approached her. "We're doing everything possible." She nodded through tears. "Thank you." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry." Marcus knew exactly what she meant. But this wasn't the time. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Right now, let's focus on him." The emergency landing was successful. Paramedics rushed aboard moments after touchdown. Richard was transported to a hospital. Before leaving, his wife stopped beside Marcus. She looked directly into his eyes. "I judged you before I knew you." Marcus remained silent. Her tears returned. "And my husband did too." Marcus nodded gently. "I hope he recovers." That was all he said. Nothing more. The flight continued later that evening. After another crew completed the journey, Marcus returned to Chicago the next day. He expected the incident to disappear. Instead, it exploded online. Several passengers had recorded Richard questioning Marcus's qualifications before the flight. Videos spread across social media. Millions of people watched. News channels replayed the footage repeatedly. The public reaction was immediate. Many viewers were furious. Others shared their own stories of discrimination. Within days, Marcus became a national symbol. Reporters requested interviews. Television shows invited him to appear. Marcus declined most of them. He wasn't interested in becoming famous. He simply wanted to do his job. A week later, something unexpected happened. Marcus received a handwritten letter. The envelope contained no return address. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was shaky. Marcus immediately recognized the signature. Richard Collins. Marcus read the letter slowly. Richard explained that he had survived a major heart condition doctors discovered after the emergency landing. According to physicians, the diversion had likely saved his life. Then came the part Marcus never expected. Richard admitted he had spent years making assumptions about people based on race, not openly, not loudly, but quietly. The kind of prejudice that hides behind excuses. The kind that says things like, "I just assumed." Richard confessed that seeing Marcus remain calm and professional after being insulted had forced him to confront something ugly about himself. The letter ended with a sentence Marcus would never forget. "You saved a life that your prejudice told you was worth less than yours." Marcus stared at those words for a long time, because they represented something bigger than one man, bigger than one flight, bigger than one moment. They represented the truth about racism itself. Most people imagine racism as screaming insults or obvious hatred, but often it appears as assumptions, doubts, questions nobody else has to answer. Doors that quietly close, opportunities that disappear, respect that must be earned again and again. Marcus understood that better than anyone. A month later, another surprise arrived. Richard invited Marcus to speak at a charity event focused on education and leadership. At first, Marcus planned to decline. Then he changed his mind. The ballroom was packed. Business leaders filled hundreds of seats. Many knew exactly what had happened on Flight 728. Richard stepped onto the stage first. The room became silent. He looked nervous. Far more nervous than the powerful businessmen people saw on television. "I spent most of my life believing I was a good person," he said. The audience listened carefully. "I never used hateful words. I never considered myself racist. But I judged people before knowing them. I doubted them before hearing them. And I excused those judgments by calling them instincts. The room remained silent. Richard looked toward Marcus. Then I met a man who showed me what character actually looks like. Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him. Richard continued. When I was scared, he stayed calm. When I was disrespectful, he remained professional. When my life depended on him, he saved me anyway. Many people in the audience lowered their eyes. Some looked emotional, because they recognized themselves in Richard's confession. Marcus eventually walked onto the stage. For a moment he simply stood there. Then he spoke. I don't want to be remembered as the black pilot who faced racism. The audience listened carefully. I want to be remembered as a pilot. The room became completely silent. Marcus continued. Because equality isn't about lowering standards. It's about allowing people to be judged by the same standards. Several people nodded. Others wiped away tears. Marcus spoke about opportunity, responsibility, character, forgiveness. But most importantly, he spoke about assumptions. The assumptions that shape lives before people ever have a chance to introduce themselves. When he finished, the audience rose to its feet. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. Yet the moment Marcus remembered most happened afterward. A young black boy approached him near the exit. He couldn't have been older than 10. The boy looked nervous. His mother stood beside him. Finally he spoke. Captain Reed. Marcus smiled. Yes. The boy looked up at him with wide eyes. I want to be a pilot too. Marcus knelt so they were eye level. Then B1. The boy hesitated. What if people say I can't? Marcus smiled, because he already knew the answer. People will always tell you who they think you are. The boy listened carefully. Marcus pointed gently toward the sky visible through the ballroom windows. But only you get to decide who you become. The boy smiled. His mother began crying quietly. Marcus stood and watched them walk away. And for the first time since Flight 728, he understood the true impact of what had happened. The story was never about Richard Collins. It wasn't about viral videos or television interviews. It wasn't even about racism. It was about what happens when dignity refuses to surrender. It was about choosing excellence when others expect failure. It was about proving that character is revealed, not when people respect you, but when they don't. And somewhere above America, thousands of airplanes continued crossing the sky every day. Most passengers would never know Marcus Reed's story. They would simply hear a calm voice from the cockpit guiding them safely home. For Marcus, that was enough, because he never needed the world to believe in him. He only needed to keep flying until they could no longer ignore the truth.